You're listening to the Ag Policy Connection, brought to you by Real Agriculture in partnership with the Canadian Agri-Food Policy Institute. We're connecting the dots between the people and the policies that shape agriculture and farming today and into the future.
It is great to be here in Ottawa. As somebody that's from the prairies, what was that this morning? Is that what they call rain? That is amazing. But it's great to be here. So what we're going to do this session is all about answering, I think, a really interesting question. Should sustainability be Canada's number one competitive advantage? So not like a competitive advantage, the number one competitive advantage. We're going to get to our panelists in a second, and I was given a few minutes, so I'll take advantage of that. Someone last night at supper asked me a question. What's the most controversial topic that you discuss on Real Ag Radio and RealAgriculture.com? I was kind of put on the spot. And had to think about it. And I said land rights and land uses, pretty controversial topic. Our audience debating supply management and whether we should have it or not, that's always controversial. But the more I thought about it, we're like, you know what, sustainability. It's a pretty controversial topic with our audience. And I think the numbers kind of show it. In January, Real Agri Studies, the market research arm of Real Agriculture, my partner and I, Justin Funk of Agri Studies out of Guelph, we asked farmers, do you see a positive or negative impact to your farm based on a number of these different policies? The number one, but this is Canadian farmers, the number one perceived negative impact to their farm from a policy perspective was sustainability and environmental policy. So we're talking about communication earlier. If it is going to be our number one priority, we've got some work to do. So this is, our panel's going to debate all this. So before we talk about, should it be our number one competitive advantage, we need to define competitive advantage. It's a good place to start. So competitive advantage refers to factors that allow a company to produce goods or services better or more cheaply or sell for more value than its rivals. These factors allow the productive entity to generate more sales or superior margins compared to the market rivals. Competitive advantages are attributed to a variety of factors, including cost structure, branding, the quality of product offerings, the distribution network, intellectual property, and customer service. So, our panel is going to answer the question, should sustainability be Canada's number one competitive advantage? Before we get our panel to answer that question, raise of hands, who thinks it should be our number one competitive advantage? Raise your hands. Who thinks that? Who thinks no? Don't worry about it. We'll compete on other things. Yeah. Okay.
A lot unsure.
Who doesn't care? Keep your hands down. Okay, let's get to our panel. So we'll start right here. Nick, introduce yourself and answer the question.
I'm Jean-Michel.
Oh, sir, calm down. So I told them, sit in this specific order so I don't get the names screwed up and then right off the bat screw ourselves up. So I know you go first.
I'm Nick Betts. No, I'm joking. I'm Jean-Michel Couture, president and partner at Groupe Ageco. We're a Canadian consultancy in ag economics and sustainability. Been around for 25 years. With respect to sustainability, we're mainly known for our work on life cycle assessments, LCAs, as well as on sustainability roadmaps. And we're also well known for a lovely French accent, as you can see. And so, to your question, should we make sustainability Canada's number one priority? The short answer would be yes, we should. As for you, Sean, I'm looking at that question from a competitiveness standpoint. So what do we need to compete in the first place? Well, we need people. We need producers, young and younger and older. We need workers with the right set of skills, all of them happy in their occupation. We also need a clean environment, sufficient water, as this morning, healthy soils, well-functioning ecosystems and so on. And we also need trust and stability in the system. We need long-lasting relationships, respectful relationships with our business partners, lenders, customers, suppliers, so to access market capitals and get fair prices. So I can go on and on with these examples, but you see the point. To be competitive, to compete in the first place, we need to leverage assets, capital that are not only financial, but also social and environmental, which are also key components of sustainability. So from my standpoint, linking sustainability to competitiveness is obvious to start with.
Thank you, Jean-Michel. Now, the real Nick Betts.
Thank you. I could try the accent. You want me? I don't. It's going to be embarrassing. So Nick Betts with the Canadian Alliance for Net Zero Agri-Food. Thanks for having me. I'm going to take a different stand than Jean-Michel, but first I'm going to tell you why. To be sustainable is something that we need to own. And even though farmers maybe don't like the word, the concept of sustainability, I've worked with farmers for a long time, and I use words like productivity and efficiency and the ability, succession planning, and all of these good things are sustainable. We need to own the word, and we need to bring it back and say what we're doing is sustainable, and you can't be sustainable if it's not economically viable. So why aren't we just talking about it as it is? And being competitive means you're being more sustainable. I would also argue that you can't be sustainable if in a debt-based economy. So we live in a debt-based economy. You can't be truly sustainable. We can be more sustainable or less sustainable, but we can't be fully sustainable. Now I'm getting into the technical, but bringing it back, one of the reasons why we don't want to be seen as the sustainable country with agriculture is climate finance accounts for about 4%. 4% of climate finance goes to land sector investments. Land sector investments account for about 20% of emissions, if we're talking about climate. So if we already say we're sustainable, how much of that additional 16% of climate finance do you think we're going to get out of the sector if they're like, oh, that's taken care of, let's move our money into the United States because they're less sustainable? I want that money here in Canada, in our agricultural sector. The other thing that's been mentioned in every single panel today and was mentioned at the Nature United event last night is we don't really have a real good, viable way of measuring, reporting, and verifying things like soil carbon or biodiversity in our landscape. So if someone says, prove it, we don't really have a viable way to measure most of these things. And in an age where we're hearing prove it a lot, from my kids up, it's really hard to understand how we're going to prove it if we don't have things like an MRV system to measure or go back on, like some of the other sectors that we're talking this morning do. And finally, we know from a lot of marketing information, a lot of research, people like quality, people like price. Sustainability is rarely something people go to a shelf and say, I'm going to pay twice as much for that. So we better do a hell of a job marketing ourselves with sustainability, or we can focus on what we know Canada is really good on, which is quality, which is product, which is reputation, and we build out the sustainability piece underneath that. So it is not the most competitive factor we have.
Okay, Ben Gibbons.
Thank you all. Pleasure to be here. Ben Gibbons. So I run a venture capital fund called Waterpoint Lane. We are investing at the intersection of technology, sustainability, and our food system. So with that backdrop, you might be somewhat surprised that I'm going to say absolutely not. Not only absolutely not should it not be our number one competitive advantage, it shouldn't be on the list. And the reason I say that, probably to take Nick's comments a little bit further, is sustainability is an outcome. It's an outcome of good business practice. It's an outcome of productivity. It's an outcome of efficiency. And if we lead with sustainability, we're leading with the wrong thing. Sustainability is a goal that we need to achieve, and the outcomes that we achieve, the ways we achieve sustainability outcomes is through good business practice and effective operational activity. I think Lloyd referenced it first up this morning. Sustainability has three broad components to it. One is environmental, one is economic, and the other is social. Whenever we get into these policy conversations, we always end up just almost directly focusing on the environmental component to it, which to your discussions with farmers is why it always becomes this negative conversation, because it's hard to drive economics at the same time as driving some of these environmental outcomes, etc. But if we focus on the opportunity that technology, innovation through product and service opportunities can create, then we can create a absolutely highly sustainable food system in Canada that and globally. But if we try to position it as our number one competitive advantage, then we're missing the opportunity that actually does sit in front of us, which is to be number one from a quality perspective, number one from a productivity and efficiency perspective. And that's where the capital needs to get deployed.
Stuart Person.
Thanks, Sean. Thanks, Sean. Can you hear me? Is my mic on? Yes. Okay, good. Well, my name is Stuart Pearson. I'm the national leader for crop services at MNP. I'm based in Edmonton, Alberta, and I also participate in a grain farming operation in and around Prince Albert, Saskatchewan. Interesting question for sure that we're tackling today. So I took the opportunity to get together with a few of my colleagues to kind of pull this one apart, and we looked at it and said, really when you look at agriculture, we thought there were four kind of key fundamental principles that it's based on here in Canada. We're providing food that needs to be accessible to everybody. We're providing food that needs to be affordable for everybody. We need to be stewards of the land and take care of our environment. We know that. And last but not least, in the area that we are obviously the most interested in is agriculture needs to be financially stable. So from a sustainability point of view, it's got to be financially sustainable. And that's how we would put together an equation of how the key factors that make up agriculture in Canada, and all of those are important, and they have to be in some sort of balance. We struggled with the definition of sustainability in many ways, and I've heard a lot of talk about that again today. We talked a lot about the cost of sustainability, and we've heard that today as well from other speakers and from the panel. I've got a couple of quotes maybe that'll come up later on that, and we've talked a little bit about, I haven't heard this one as much, but what does the consumer really want? And has anybody, have we spent enough time asking them? And a lot of the data that I would see out there suggests that still cost is the number one issue when consumers are looking at their food. It's not the only issue, but it seems to be a very important one. And what does sustainability do to cost? Another thing that came up today was data, and I really think it's important to factor in data into this conversation, because we'll never know truly how sustainable we are unless we have the data to prove it. So the question was, what should our number one competitive advantage be? Should it be sustainability in Canada? Well, we look at it as, we've got a very good production system in Canada for agriculture. We've got an excellent transportation system, as long as it's working. And those systems provide consistent, are stable, provide consistent, and are not subject to large-scale global insecurities. And so when you think about that statement, and I don't know if any of you heard of an author named Peter Zeihan. He's also a geopolitical analyst. He's got a book out called The End of the World is Just the Beginning. If you read chapter 7 of that book, it's extremely interesting. It's all about agriculture. And he points out that Canada is one of only 3 countries in the world that has all the things we need right here to be able to produce agriculture commodities, being land, water, energy, capital, fertilizer, machinery. All of those things are here, and the list goes on. And so when you think about that, when I think about that and I try to answer this question, I would have to answer it as no.
sustainability should not be our number one competitive advantage. Our number one competitive advantage is what we can do in terms of feeding Canadians and feeding the world. We could get it done, and we can do it well.
Okay, so you've heard from our panelists there. There's a mixture of yes, and there's some there's a hard yes, and then there's some two no's, but, and then we have like a no, but why are we even talking about this? So we got a good mixture up here, bit of an assortment. So Jean-Michel, let's start with you. Stuart brought up the consumer in terms of, what's the consumer really want? You're committed to this should be our number one competitive advantage. It's the consumer or the customer, that entity, is it giving us the market signals to suggest that sustainability should be our number one competitive advantage?
I would say that right now, sustainability or demand, or however we want to define and see how it comes across on the marketplace, it's a B2B concern and demand. It's not a B2C. So I don't expect right now consumers to be the main drivers with market demand on the prices and all of that. Because right now, why I say it's a B2B more so than a B2C is because it's less about marketing and the information you bring to consumers who are basically expecting things to be produced the right way and the proper meeting best practices. But it's more so for businesses along the value chains to get the reassurance that the risks are being mitigated and coped with. So I do think that right now the key driver for sustainability and the demand for that is a B2B, not a B2C. And in which case, the following question is, okay, but who's going to pay for that? If it's not the consumer at the end of the day, but that's another question. But I think it's not from the consumer side of things that we should look at the question. Is mainly from the business value chain perspective.
Yeah, you can jump in. Who should pay for it?
Well, there are basically three channels through which money flows: consumers, taxpayers, and through productivity gains. And so I think depending on the expectation, like I said, sustainability is not a thing from my perspective. It's a mix of do you have the right, on your farm, on your business, have you made the right investments to mitigate the impact of floods and things like that? So I think that depending on the issue you're tackling, the money will come from different pockets. And part of that will come from businesses themselves through productivity gains, and part of that from consumers to some extent. And a large part as well through taxation and taxpayers' money.
Yeah, now, Stuart, you mentioned the costs of some of this. So, from your standpoint, we know what runs downhill, and there's a lot of concern in the farming community that I'm in the nation's capital. I'm not sure I'm supposed to swear, but so we use your imaginations. So we know what rolls downhill. So there's a lot of concern in the farming community that these costs are being pushed down on them. From your perspective, what needs to change in terms of policy or business practices to make sustainability financially viable for producers?
Yeah, I mean, so we've heard a lot about that today in terms of innovation and technology that is allowing us to do that. And we've seen that over the years. And we have to acknowledge, and this was mentioned, I think, by Justine in some of her comments this morning, that if you go back into the 80s and you look at what, grains and oilseeds farmers were doing, specifically in the prairies, we've come a long ways. And those farmers did not necessarily do that because they were being paid to do it or because there was some sort of incentive. They did it because it was the right thing to do for their farm, and it actually made them more profitable. So there's an example of where we made an excellent improvement in the sustainability of our farms because it was the right thing to do and because the technology was there that allowed us to do that. One of the things I wanted to bring up is back a couple of weeks ago, the CEO of JBS made an interesting comment at a conference that he was at. And he said, we cannot assume the consumer will pay the bill for taking beef and making beef more sustainable, right? And I think he's bang on that one. So, but if the consumer isn't going to pay it, who's going to pay it is what you're saying, Sean. And I think the producers in Canada cannot be looked at to foot that bill. It has to come through us being more efficient. There isn't enough margin in farming at this point in time for us to be giving up more pay for the sustainability increases. If the consumer isn't going to pay for it, then we got to get more efficient. And if we can't get more efficient, now we have a problem.
Yeah, we need to change this conversation from who's going to pay for it to how do we execute in a productivity and efficiency methodology that no one is having to pay for it? So, like, we invest in regenerative agriculture, the theme of regenerative agriculture. You know, I'm not going to talk about the definition of regenerative agriculture because, you know, we'll have a lot of confusion there.
If farmers think that sustainability is a controversial word, wait till you get to regen.
Exactly. But you know, to your point, like if I sat down with a farmer and said, you know, I want you to convert to regenerative agriculture, you know, punch me and then, you know, kind of show me the door most of the time. But if I show him a way that I can reduce their requirements on inputs, reduce their requirements on, you know, water rights, etc., reduce their operating costs, and by the way, it actually improves your soil health and it's regenerative agriculture, we're having a great conversation.
Sounds awesome.
So like, change this conversation from, you know, the consumer is going to have to pay for it, the taxpayer is going to have to pay for it too. If we just get better at our business practices and we invest in the technology and innovation that can support that, then our whole ecosystem becomes much more efficient.
Or sustainable, as we call it.
And by the way, there's some sustainability outcomes that come out of that. We're decarbonising. We're improving our consumptions of water. We're reducing food waste. We heard about food waste earlier.
Go ahead, Nick. Yeah.
So sustainability is an outcome of what we're doing now. But what if I want to be more sustainable? Won't I produce that sustainable outcome?
Yeah.
So they are sustainable practices.
Absolutely.
Okay.
But we're not leading with sustainability. Sustainability is what comes out of, like, great execution.
But if I'm a farmer and I have kids and I want them to come back to the farm and I want them to farm and, you know, I want to carry on my legacy, I want sustainability.
Yeah, for sure. But
okay.
But someone said it before. You like, maybe with multiple people have said it. Farmers, like, execute on sustainability on a daily basis.
Yeah.
Like, their number one asset is the land that they're you know, farming on. And so, like, in no way, shape or form is any farmer trying to ruin their number one asset by the practices that they adopt. Now, some historical practices aren't as sustainable in today's world than they were perceivably 20 or 30 years ago, etc. But they are the number one stewards of the land that they operate in, and so they are trying to improve their asset on a daily basis.
Okay, so Nick, you've mentioned that sustainability is kind of pre-competitive, right? So what exactly does that look like? Do you have to have?
Yeah.
I get the notion in theory, but if it's a pre-competitive concept,
yeah,
then don't we have to have everybody on board prior to the competition actually happening? And what if people aren't on board? Like, what does that look like?
So when I go into the grocery store and I look at the meat section, I don't see the 3 different brands of meat there and say, I wonder which one is safe to eat. Food safety is pre-competitive for us here.
Again,
I go there and say, I assume that if it's on the shelf and it's meat on the shelf, I assume that all 3 are going to be safe to eat and aren't going to kill me. That solution came about with pre-competitive collaboration at a national level. Everybody said, all right, we want people to eat more meat as an industry, and we want them to not have to worry about if it's safe or not. So we're going to work together to make sure that our meat processing, our meat systems are at a state where it doesn't matter what meat is on the shelf, it's going to be safe for that consumer to eat, because that's better for our whole industry. So from a sustainability perspective, when we're talking about pre-competitive action, there are elements where, I mean, they need to be couched because we live in a capitalist system where marketing and profit has to happen and there is competition. But on certain things, we can all agree. And there are certain things, kind of what everybody said here, where there's public good in a lot of the practices that are happening on farm for sustainability. There is de-risking of the farm assets, both from the lender but also for the farmer. And there's clear reporting benefits around global initiatives that are happening for everybody throughout that supply chain. So on issues of farm sustainability, if there's the opportunity to have those people around the table, kind of like in an organization like Anza or something, we could get to have that conversation and talk about...
Nice plug, that was good.
How can we actually work together and say, what does sustainability look like, or in our case, net zero? And is there a way that we can use all the people who are valuing this to help encourage and incentivize in the way that of the value that we're getting out of it to be able to get the end result we all want.
So, all right, go ahead, John.
I just want to react to the case. Is it Mike? Yeah, thank you. I just want to react to that, the example of food safety, because I do think it's an interesting case study to look back at. So now it's a pre-competitive topic to a large extent. It wasn't for a long time. In the 90s, at first, the first GFSI, the first ASEP facilities was a way to actually access markets in comparison to others who were not. And actually, back even earlier in the time, the 60s, 70s, no producers, I mean, I'm sure everyone in the producers back then would be saying, we are producing safe food. No one was actually questioning, like no one was saying, well, I don't produce safe food. Everybody was claiming loud and clear, we are producing safe food. But you know what? The market started asking, no, just you claiming you're producing safe food is not enough. We want you to adopt certain practices. We want you to making sure that you provide the reassurances. And you know what? This had an impact on the system, which where many farmers went out of business, actually willingly or not willingly, because they didn't want to adapt their practices to the new requirements being set upon them, because markets were expecting them to adopt certain practices. And then for a long time, a few years, got a kind of a benefit for being early adopters. And it took a few years before GFSI came in and set a free competitive standard. And I think that, again, I don't think sustainability is a thing as a whole. It's a mix of drivers impacting businesses. And if we segregate and differentiate them, at this point, I do think the business environment is changing on steroid, and so food safety times several aspects. And so this is why I do think there is a real need for the industry in Canada to adapt and to keep up with competition before it gets to a certain level where it becomes free competitive. But I think that case is an interesting one to dig into.
Okay, so if you guys are going to use food safety as like a parallel example, you're arguing for increased regulation, codes of conduct, and then that can be that's a fun one in terms of.
I've put a lot of words in my mouth.
Yeah, well, you can answer it when I get back. So codes of conduct, increased regulation to provide direction on how people are supposed to get to that outcome. That can be difficult given the high rate of variability that is out there from farm to farm, whether that's soil and growing crops or livestock. What do you argue for?
So when I was in university, I had about 3 different things I could use on the stovetop. I had, like a couple of spatulas and a pot. And I figured out how to make a balanced meal with those things. But it wasn't the most efficient, and it didn't taste as very good. But it gave me what I needed at the time. Now I have, lots of things in my kitchen. And I teach my daughter and my son to cook with all of these things. And they're learning, and their food is going to taste better, and it's going to be more efficient, and it's going to be advanced to when I was their age or a little older and had to make food with limited things. When we were doing the food safety thing, we didn't have that knowledge. We had one pot. We now have a whole chef's kitchen. So why would we need all of the same tools that we needed before, or these instruments that we put in place, when we can learn from everything that's happened around the world? We can learn from the food safety example to say, this is the ring fence we want to work on pre-competitively, so that, hey, maybe Canada does want to use sustainability as its number one competitive advantage, but we need to figure out what this ring fence looks like and how to work on it, and then we can go forth and do whatever the heck we want.
Yeah. Curious what the panel thinks about the notion that if we do make sustainability our number one competitive advantage, we get ourselves all wrapped around that, and we're waving the flag and we're doing the thing. Is there political risk, like a change in the domestic government, a change in our own government south of the border, a change in an attitude in Europe? Are you concerned about that, the political risks of the ebb and flow of how people and governments feel about sustainability around the world?
Yes, for sure. Doug? No. I think, in kind of leveraging your previous question as well, I think we've seen continually increasing regulation does not lead to great outcomes in the ag sector and many other sectors for sure. Like, I think we kind of heard about some of the trouble that Europe have had with some of their increased regulation, obviously, and farmer response to that. Increasing regulation is not the answer to achieving the goals that we're looking to achieve, the outcomes that sustainability is, not the competitive advantage that sustainability is. If we use government, and i.e. government capital, and government, the resources that the government can provide to support innovation, whether it's in technology, whether it's in services or products, that is the way that we actually achieve the outcomes that we're trying to achieve, not through, increasing regulation, throwing a 30% mandate on a reduction in emissions in various sectors, etc., that obviously going to cause a ton of people problems. Like, those are the ways, like funding companies, cool startups, getting FCC to deploy their capital, increasing their risk tolerance, like you heard earlier. That is the way that we achieve competitive advantages in the sector that we're operating in from a global perspective.
Anybody else want to grab political risk?
I think the risks are higher and not doing anything. I think that, there are always different types of risk. Let's say, is our political risk higher than the risk of not being insured the right way, for not taking actions correctly? So there is a basket of different risk farmers are facing with respect to these drivers of sustainability. Like I said, going back, we can think of that about labor, about digitalization, productivity gains. All of that falls under the umbrella of sustainability from my perspective. And so, yes, there are political risks, but I think the drivers and the changes we're facing worth the investment, because it's a long term. So there are like specific events, but trends in the back end, in the background, which are pretty stable from my perspective. So it's worth a try at investing there.
Yeah, I mean, if we're talking about sustainability means you're more agile as a business. If we're taking it back to the actual concept of sustainability. So if we have an agile sector, if we have an agile farm that can deal with environmental risks and economic risks and trade risks, that's a good thing. So again, it's coming down to the sustainability is the outcome thing, which I still think you have it backwards. But it's the idea that if we have that sustainable farm, I'm going to be able to modulate my farm or my supply chain, or instead of trading with partner A, I can trade with partner B, and I'm more agile to do so.
Yeah. But I think the reality of the situation is that we live in a very global food system. And so if we sit here and we're completely like living on an island and we just need to feed ourselves, sure, like go to town on sustainability and regulate the sector all you like. But we are in a highly competitive global food system. And so if we over-regulate what's happening in Canada, driving increased policy that makes things more expensive to execute on in our market, therefore, we're going to have to like pass that cost on in the export markets in some capacity. Otherwise, we're going to again like sit here and ask the farmer to wear it. No thank you, says the farmer, and now we have a massive issue with respect to succession in our farming industry anyway. So we're just exacerbating that issue. If we do that, then we're just asking for Canada to lose its position as, what are we, the fifth largest exporter, producer in the world. Yeah. Do we want to become the 20th? Do we want to become the 50th? That's the position that we're asking ourselves to take in that regard.
I like how you linked over-regulation with sustainability.
And I think it's John. I think to add to that point, like we heard from some people from various parts of the world this morning, and they're all working on this too. And so if you say we're going to make this our number one competitive advantage, well, what happens when they're better than us at it, right?
You better be really good at it.
We better be really good.
But we heard from Australia, the UK, and Latin America. We didn't hear from Russia. We didn't hear from China. Like, the reality is, like, these are big kind of ag-producing nations, and they're not going to get on board. They're not going to be aligned to us in terms of our regulations and our policies. So, like, we need to be practical about it as well.
Michelle.
I would love being Nick. I mean, the big thing, Nick would be great.
Cheers with this help.
No, this is so there's nothing wrong in being Nick. Actually, there's, with all due respect, there was something missing from that discussion, and actually partly from the this morning discussion as well, is time, like the timeliness of all the discussion, because we're looking at sustainability not only as a concept in itself, which I disagree with, but we're also looking at that from a short-sighted perspective, short term. Should we be sustainable tomorrow morning? What do we do tomorrow on my farm? What investment? These are real practical questions, but let's put that aside for a moment and say, okay, what kind of agriculture do we want in Canada in 2040, in 2050? Because that's the time. Building a barn, buying a combine, I mean, this machinery and this building will still be around in 2045, in 2040. So we have to think today about decisions being made that will have an impact not only tomorrow morning, which again, important, but be around in 10 years from now, 15 years from now, 25 years from now, because and then, you know what, 2050, which is like the moment where the world we're living in is likely to be different. So I think changing that perspective on the temporality of that discussion will actually bring a different set of discussions. And like, what kind of vision do we have about the future of agriculture? And the visions, plural, because there are more than one likely. And what actions do we take today? Which consequences we'll live with for the next 20 years? And this is a today's thing to do with long-term impact. And I think that's a real question we should ask ourselves for sustainability to be the number one competitive advantage of the agri-food sector.
I do wonder about, we talked about how the consumer, how they factor here, but there is international trade agreements that are going to play a role too, right? And so we're having issues domestically and internationally sorting out some of the math on who's good at this, who's not great at it, who's just talks about it, and talk is cheap in some areas, and there's a lot of concern out there, but it's going to factor into international trade agreements. You think about things like carbon border adjustments, where there could be tariffs based on your sustainability practices or some of your environmental claims. So from a trade perspective, we can't ignore it, right, Ben? Like, totally? Like, you said, why are we talking about it? We can't ignore it because it's going to be a factor in trade agreements going forward.
Yeah, because it's going to be a target and it's going to be an outcome of what we're actually executing on. So if we, again, like, flip the conversation around, because, like, it shouldn't be our number one competitive advantage, but it should be an outcome that we're actually absolutely focused on. So absolutely agree with Nick's comments.
It's actually Jean-Michel.
I'm getting confused. Absolutely agree with Jean-Michel's comments that we need to think about what our system looks like in 2050. Completely aligned on that. How do we get there? For sure, we need to think through, and we need to be cognizant of the decisions that we're making today that are going to affect that outcome. And continue to reiterate the fact that it's an outcome that we're trying to get to. And so if we focus on how we deliver innovation and technology that can get us to there in a economic manner today, then we're going to be just fine. If we focus on how do we regulate ourselves to get there through policy and through other means, then we're going to shoot ourselves in the foot.
Anybody else want to grab that one?
I'm not saying to regulate it. That's if we work sustainably at the start.
But how do you get to sustainability?
So,
and what's the goal?
To be more sustainable. So as a farmer right now, we call this like nutrient management, right?
Sure.
Like that's being more sustainable. I want to use less input to provide more product. I get more money. That's being more sustainable. I want to deal with soil health. I want to make strong soil on my farm so that my crops go better. So I have more resistance to different diseases. That's being more sustainable. But if I look at it as a whole, it's a really huge concept and it's really complex to understand. But it is this umbrella that we're shooting towards outcomes that are going to be more sustainable. But we can look at it with this idea of being sustainable in mind, because they're not individual. I can do this here and this here and this here. It's like this. And it's really hard to think about it if we try to tease out all those pieces because of all the interactions and consequences.
Stuart, you mentioned the fact we don't have a definition, or we can't agree on a definition. Does that actually matter? Is that kind of a barrier that we debate all the time and just not willing to actually get down to some of the work?
Yeah, I think it is. I mean, there are lots of definitions out there, and there is some agreement. I wouldn't say there's none, but you can get a variety of opinions on the matter, and it depends on what area you're talking about. Are you talking about environmental sustainability? Or are you talking about financial sustainability? There's many components to this, right? So, yeah, I think the definition is going to be important, and if you wanted to answer this question, yes, then we need to agree on some definitions globally to be able to say that that is our number one competitive advantage, which I think is another challenge we're going to have in trying to say yes to this question. I think we have so many other things that we can hold out that would be our number one advantage in Canada, like the fact that we are a reliable supplier, not only domestically, but internationally. I think we should be focused on those. And I think back to my opening statement, we've got everything we need here to produce. So let's make sure we don't hold ourselves back by doing regulations or other things, chasing the sustainability piece. I think we'll get there on sustainability. We'll get there on our own. We absolutely will. I think the producers are doing a great job today, and they continue to do it. We do it on our farm. We're constantly improving. And I think as the technology gets better, we're going to adopt it. We already are.
Jean-Michel? Something, or it's which is key is sustainability. However, we want to define that there are different outcomes for sure, and you can maximize certain aspect of that. And something that I think Katie from Australia earlier this morning mentioned, a key word I think should be throughout our discussion is trade-offs. Because it's not true, it's win-win-win all the time. They are low-hanging fruits. I mean, typically businesses and organizations are sizing them. I mean, it's easy, and making money, being more efficient and less footprint, all good. The real question gets where, like, you have to decide turn left or right, and they might impact one outcome versus the other. And this is where another concept mentioned this morning by Justine from FCC, boldness is required. Because when you're having to make a decision whether should I increase productivity, should I increase the return, the economic return, should I increase producers and workers' well-being, should I increase animal welfare, and now and in the future, you know what? There are trade-offs. And a decision needs to be made, I think, and that decision will bear consequences, and someone will have to deal with these consequences. So this is where something I do think that if we just talk about sustainability as a thing, we're missing the fact that its components are actually related to outcomes that are competing against one another now and in the future. And I think that's a critical aspect where maybe governments or the industry as a whole needs to be bold enough to make these decisions.
I think Jean-Michel's come around, right? I think he said sustainability is an outcome, right? And so, like, if we just focus on the component parts, we got to get there. So
Trapped you.
If what is speaking.
You're welcome.
We were chatting over by the sound booth earlier, and somebody had mentioned you were kind of bad about the consumer. Somebody had mentioned about the impact and the how Wall Street's a driver in this area, and companies trying to make sustainability a number one priority, and a lot of that has to do with registration for things like green funds and like that. Let's chat about that. Who wants to grab it first?
I would say Wall Street / Bay Street are almost as fickle as the consumer. So at various points in time, absolutely sustainability is quote unquote important to them. But in like you kind of referenced earlier, Jean-Michel, the B2B, it's important, B2C less important. I'd say over time, it's even become less important in the B2B circle in today's kind of environment where there's a lot of things that are kind of being thrown at some of our large corporates, from geopolitical kind of to macroeconomic facts down. There is definitely an element where there have been some funds created, funds like ours that it's called Waterpoint Lane Sustainability Fund. Like, you know, I'm kind of talking outside two sides of my mouth sometimes here, but there is capital that's attached to that, but it is still fickle capital. Like, funds get created, funds kind of move away. At the end of the day, like, they are all capital is focused on return of capital and return on capital. So everything that we're doing in the sustainability space, at the end of the day, still has to generate a return on capital for it to be effective.
Honestly, I think it's the same way for farmers. You know, we at Real Agriculture, we made a couple different video series focused on sustainability. And one in particular, we were going to call it Sustainability Stories initially. And we were concerned about the pushback from the farmer on that. So we didn't call it that. We called it something else and focused on sustainability stories from the standpoint of ROI and return. And farmers getting a return by doing these things that happen to be defined as sustainable. Not a peek from anybody in the farming community because of how we phrased it and didn't lead with, you know, an ideological charge, so to speak. Okay, so it's the audience's turn to ask some questions, and they've been listening there very attentively. Please go to the mic. Is that Aaron? Aaron Garlick.
Excellent panel discussion. Thank you very much. It's enlightening to have such diversity of opinion on the panel. I'm a little confused, Sean, because there's this dual narrative that follows this discussion everywhere it goes. It is this. The question of who is going to pay for it? What is it? Because at the same time, each of you have talked about all the efficiency gain that we can get from making our operations more sustainable. What is it when we talk about who's going to pay for it? What is it that is more expensive? I'm confused because there's these dual narratives that follow this conversation around. I see you nodding in agreement, Jean-Michel, and I expect that given your work, you need to quantify that for me.
No pressure. You want to go there?
It is interesting because it goes back to what we're talking about with respect to sustainability. So, I mean, I'll answer from an environmental standpoint, but I mean, with S211 and all these things, I mean, the social aspect is also critical, and the same logic would apply to more than just GHG, I would say, even though most of the discussion is about GHGs. And so, well, it to start with is going back to data, measurement. I mean, unfortunately, there is just go back. There is a need for reassurance and having access to the right data. This will cost more money because this is adding to. I mean, it can be linked to precision farming, so two birds, one stone, things like that. But of course, I mean, farmers will have to think about how to collect, validate, and sort data and make it available in a way that is efficient and effective. And I'm not saying it's easy, but for sure, these are extra costs related to that. There might be side benefits because, I mean, if you get better data, you can manage and make more informed decisions. But of course, there is likely a dead loss, a net cost to that. And that's just in the starting point because, again, reporting that information in an effective way, providing the proper reassurance, that's related to the fact that as of now, and it's likely to increase the need for more reassurance and more evidence, and that's going to bear extra cost.
But if we do it right, the it should not exist, I think is the macro point. So, like using your example of data and verification, like you kind of look at it as a cost because they have to do something new. But if we, for want of a better description, like implement sensor technology that can do the data verification automated, but it also does provides information to the farmer that allows them to better their practices, reduce their input costs, reduce their water inputs, etc. Then there is no it. It becomes an outcome of the practice, and therefore sustainability becomes the outcome of that.
I'm with Ben. I was going to say that the it is that practice that we haven't proven to provide an economic benefit to the farmer yet or at this point.
Right. Yeah.
But the government or regulator has deemed that it's a practice that we should be engaged in. That's how I would define it.
Right.
Oh, there's a
Well, there's a cost.
de-risking the practice change.
Right. Okay.
Because there is like maybe there is a yield. We don't know, but it is something. If I get a payment to do that practice change and try it out, I might try it, right? And then if I get over through that valley of death, then it's like, oh, this is sweet. I'm now making higher productivity gains or something. But it's a shift in practice.
It's the technology needs to catch up to what we're trying to do. And in some cases it has. So in those cases we are saving money. It is a better practice, and financially, not just for the environment, but financially. But in some cases we don't have the technology yet. And I think that's what the JBS CEO was talking about on beef cattle. They don't have the technology to do some of the things that they're being asked to do. And therefore it's going to cost cattle producers more money to do that right now. But can we get there? Maybe.
Yeah, at one time, zero till had an it. I think we've proven to this point it doesn't anymore.
Yeah.
Another question. Go ahead.
Thank you so much. I guess first to start, this has been a really interesting conversation. I've very much enjoyed listening, and there is a part of me that kind of wishes we could have these conversations in a way that producers could hear more, just so that they could hear that the discussions are on sustainability aren't just about, excuse the technical term, but screwing them over. At least there's some really real benefits, and you do want to get them to a place where they have the economic sustainability and they can meet, those other goals that are floating around. Speaking of floating around, I've heard the word quality kind of pop into the conversations amongst you and amongst some of the earlier discussions. And I'm just wondering, from your perspective, like, where's the linkages between sustainability and Canada's quality products, since that tends to be one of our key competitive advantages internationally? Like, do you have any thoughts on that? Is that something that maybe we should be exploring more or less? Is there nothing in that? Like, just really interested to hear what you guys think about that.
What?
Well, I think the sustainability discussion should, in theory, add to the quality of our products. I wouldn't go out and say that our products are low quality at this point in time, because I don't believe that. But hey, if we can make changes that improve the sustainability of our operations, and in some of those changes may improve the quality of our products, then great. Absolutely, that's one of the outcomes, I guess, of that.
Exactly. And like, I think the other point is, like, they're not mutually exclusive. We're not trading off quality for sustainability or vice versa. I think about something like nutrient density and how do you improve nutrient density in some of our products. There is highly effective ways of doing that lead to great sustainability outcomes. If we think about some of the application of some biological opportunities in that regard that reduce our reliance on synthetic fertilizers, etc. So there's a ton of opportunity to kind of have those as an and, not an or.
Yeah, and finally, I mean, if we have farms that have that buffer system built in through more sustainable soil health practice, like better soil health, better farm systems, then there's more likely we're going to get a consistent quality product year on year. So that if I need this quality grade, I'm going to do it 80% of the time instead of 50% of the time. That's better for us.
Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead. We're involved in different projects where we have to quantify and assess the profile of different commodities depending on where they're being from, where they're coming from, how they're being produced, and now we do see like GHG emissions, the water risk indicators being related to a commodity and benchmarked against different sourcing regions and vendors. And we do even see now the labor-related risk related to that as well, deforestation and so on. So it's already happening. And now we are already in a process. It goes from retailers to large processors and others who are actually assessing these risks and connecting these dots together. And at the end of the day, it's part of a package that we call, is that a reliable and credible product with the characteristics that I'm looking for. So the quality somehow. So it's already happening, and it's going up fast. And we're talking about like impacts related thing, and we had to add to that the adaptation related aspect, which are you a reliable supplier given the volatility we're entering in? And I think that's all part of the quality of a product and of a vendor as well.
thank you, everybody, for your attention and your great questions. Let's give the panel a great round of applause.
Back to Darlene.